For the past 30 years or so, two of the world's biggest powers have gone down these completely different roads. One has built these incredible, gleaming new cities, pulling hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. The other, well, it's seen its infrastructure start to crumble and society feel more and more divided. So what's going on? The analyses we're digging into today says the answer isn't just about economics. No, it goes way deeper. It's about two totally opposite ideas of what a government is even for.
All right, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the story of these two powers. Then we're going to dive into China's model, what the source calls the responsibility engine, and see what makes it tick. We'll contrast that with America's gridlock machine. After that, we'll stack them up, head to head, and finally explore the massive test that each of these systems is facing right now.
Okay, so let's start with the big question here. How on earth did these two nations end up in such wildly different places? I mean, the data tells a pretty shocking story.
Just take a look at the economic growth. Between 1990 and 2020, China's economy grew at a mind-boggling average of almost 9.5% a year. The US, around 2.5%. Now you might think, okay, what's a few percentage points? But when you compound that difference over 30 years, the result is just absolutely world-changing. And this is where you really see what that difference looks like in the real world. On one side, you have China building the world's biggest high-speed rail network, basically from nothing, in less than a generation. On the other side, in the US, the American Society of Civil Engineers, the people who actually build this stuff, they consistently give their own country's infrastructure a D, an unacceptable rating. So how is that even possible? Well, the analysis says it all comes down to their core philosophies of governing.
So, to really get how this happened, we've got to pop the hood on each country's governing machine. Let's start with the one that fueled China's absolutely historic rise.
The source material has a name for China's system, an unlimited responsibility government. The best way to think about it is like a parental state, but for 1.5 billion people. The government's basic promise is, we'll take care of everything. The economy, your job, social order, all of it. But here's the catch. To deliver on a promise that huge, it needs an equally huge amount of power.
And this isn't just a random grab for power. It's a machine built for one thing: results. Officials get promoted based on cold, hard data, like how much the GDP grew in their province. This creates what the source calls an entrepreneurial government, where local leaders pretty much act like CEOs competing with each other. And at the top, the state can mobilize the entire country's resources with one simple goal in mind: concentrate power to do big things.
Now this brings us to a really provocative and controversial point from the scholar Qin Hui. He argues that the incredible speed of this system comes from something he calls a low human rights advantage. The idea here is that by limiting things like individual protests or the ability to block projects, the state basically cut out all the transaction costs, the endless time and money spent on lawsuits, debates, and negotiations. And by doing that, it could build and transform the country at a speed that's just unimaginable anywhere else. Okay, so now let's flip the coin and look at the American model, which this analysis paints in a very, very different light.
This system is described not as a government with no power, but as a no-responsibility government. And the key idea here is that power is completely disconnected from consequences. When something goes wrong, and things always go wrong, the system is almost perfectly designed so that it's impossible to hold any one person or any one party accountable. The blame just kind of disappears.
Political scientist Francis Fukuyama has a great name for this. He calls it a vetocracy. Think about it. The system of checks and balances was designed to stop any one person from getting too much power and becoming a tyrant. But over time, it's morphed into a system where so many different people and groups have the power to veto, to say no, that it's become almost impossible for anyone to get enough power to actually say yes and get big things done. And this vetocracy creates this whole mess of problems. Gridlock is the obvious one. But it also leads to what the source calls repatrimonialization, which is really just a fancy way of saying public power gets captured by private money through lobbying and endless campaign donations. And all of this is held together by the blame game. When things don't work, it's easy, right? The White House blames Congress, Congress blames the White House, everyone blames the agencies, no one ever has to take responsibility.
So what happens when you put these two models side by side? How have they actually performed over the last few decades?
This table really just lays it all out, doesn't it? On one side, you have a system built for speed and action. Decision-making is fast, responsibility is crystal clear. On the other side, you have a system where decision-making is incredibly slow, responsibility is ambiguous, it's anyone's guess who's in charge, and any long-term plan is basically thrown out the window every 4 to 8 years.
And all of that has a huge impact on what people actually think about their government. According to the analysis, trust in China's government is what you'd call performance-driven. It stays high as long as the government delivers the goods. But in the US, trust is procedure-driven. It's based on faith in the system itself. The problem is, when that system gets stuck in gridlock and stops delivering results, people's faith in it just evaporates.
And you know where this difference really shows up? In a crisis. The Chinese model allows for this top-down, all-out, saturation-level mobilization of resources. But in the US system, a crisis often just magnifies the friction. It becomes less about solving the problem and more about political infighting, arguing over who has the authority to do what, and calculating how every move will play in the next election.
But hold on, this isn't some simple story of a winner and a loser. Because the analysis argues that both of these models are now cracking. They are both facing their own ultimate test, thanks to their own deep internal flaws.
And this is the absolute key insight. While their problems look like total opposites, the root cause is exactly the same. Both systems have a dangerous, fundamental mismatch between power and responsibility. China has immense power, but it's matched with an overwhelming, maybe even impossible level of responsibility. The US has immense power too, but it's scattered everywhere with almost no one truly responsible for the final outcome.
For China, the danger is brittleness. The system is like a skyscraper built on a foundation of never-ending growth. If that growth slows down, it risks what's called contract overload, a catastrophic failure to deliver on all its promises. For America, the danger isn't a sudden collapse, it's a slow, corrosive decay. It's the legal corruption that eats away at the system from the inside until the social contract that holds the whole thing together just dissolves.
So what's the fix for China? Well, according to this analysis, it's a bit of a paradox. To survive, it has to willingly give up some of its power. It needs to stop micromanaging every aspect of the economy and society and instead create real ways for the public to hold it accountable for the power it does keep.
And for the United States, the challenge is pretty much the exact mirror image. It doesn't need to give up power. It needs to rebuild its ability to actually use its power effectively. That means finding a way to overcome the vetocracy, to break the gridlock, and, this is the big one, to make power responsible to the public again, not just to private interests and big donors. And that leaves us with the ultimate question for our time, doesn't it? This competition, it isn't really about economics or military hardware anymore. It's a race to see which of these two systems can be the first to solve its own core paradox. Because whoever can figure out how to finally create a government where power is truly and effectively balanced with responsibility, well, they won't just lead the 21st century, they will have redefined what's possible.